Are you making recovery harder than it needs to be? Most runners over the age of 50 are, without even realizing it. In this video, we're sharing powerful, no-nonsense recovery strategies that'll get you running pain and injury-free, bouncing back from sessions faster, and get you running better for years to come. So what are the biggest recovery mistakes that are holding you back? Let's dig in.
Running too often takes away from our recovery. The older we get, the more our body needs time to recover. By running every day, running too much, running harder, takes away from the ability to recover from those training sessions, where ultimately our adaptation to those training sessions is actually taking place. By getting rid or taking away from the recovery sessions, we're affecting our recovery and can potentially lead to illness or even getting injured.
Recovery isn't just a break, it's an essential part of allowing your muscles to repair themselves and grow after you've done the workout. As we create little micro tears or damage to the muscles, and while we are resting or recovering, that is when the body repairs those muscle tears and lays down more muscle tissue so that you can actually reverse the loss of muscle as you get older and you can get stronger. It's really important that you are providing the rest and nutrition so that your body has got the building blocks necessary to do the repair to the damage that you're doing when you are strengthening your muscles. Therefore, it's important to incorporate proper rest days, sleep, and nutrition so that you can see the best results.
Do not skip your rest days. This is really important, and I think it takes a little bit of getting used to, is understanding that why those rest days are important. I think when you start understanding that, you'll really start to emphasize on your rest days. And they're important because you only actually get the benefit of all your training when you are resting and recovering. So as Dev even mentioned earlier, there is a little bit of breakdown that happens when you're doing your sessions. There's muscle fibers that are tearing. Overall, the body is having some systemic failure, and then what we do is when we rest and recover, the body goes, whoa, I actually didn't like feeling like that, and it makes itself a little bit stronger and stronger. And so that is why those rest days and recovery days are so important. If you don't take those seriously, you'll just find that you tend to be digging yourself deeper and deeper and deeper. It might start with that you feel like you're just getting slower and slower, but if you continue to do that for a very long extended period of time, you could get to some sort of overtraining or even worse, an injury or just not performing.
I want you to see your training as a quick equation. Your running, or the stimulus you're putting on your body, plus your rest or recovery equals growth or your fitness. More is not always better. Here at Coach Parry, we highly recommend at least one full rest day a week. That means doing nothing, no training. You can also use cross-training as a really good recovery tool. Cross-training, things like cycling or swimming, maybe even rowing, has much less impact and eccentric load on your body to what running does. As a result of that, you can do a little bit more of it without that same breakdown and hard impact on the body. Cross-training is a very good tool for you to do, even if it means dropping a training session, especially if the body's feeling a little bit tired or a little bit tender, and rather getting on a bike and doing a cycling session instead of that run. Over the age of 50, you would actually be better off doing a strength training session and dropping one of your runs in the week, rather than trying to just hammer home run after run after run and forgetting about prioritizing that rest day or an active recovery day with things like cross-training. When it comes to our sleep, there are two main factors that we really need to focus on. One is the amount of sleep, and two is the quality of sleep. More often than not, the quality of sleep is actually more important, and I'm going to get to that in a bit. Talking about the amount of sleep we get though, it's really important to make sure that we go to bed early. When I say early, we usually recommend going to bed before 10 o'clock. If you can get into bed before 10 o'clock, our REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, which is really that deep sleep that you fall into, that is when we optimally release growth hormone and testosterone. Now, if you go to bed too late, our REM sleep actually only happens much later in our sleep cycles. So if you go to bed much after 10 o'clock, What you are doing is limiting the amount of time that you're asleep for, and as a result, the amount of REM sleep that you might actually get throughout a night. The same applies to waking up early in the morning. So if you go to bed really late and you wake up really early, you have a very limited window of potential REM sleep, as a result affecting that growth hormone and testosterone release, which in turn is going to affect the regeneration and your recovery process. We need to make sure that we're not shortchanging ourselves in terms of our sleep. Just like with your running program, you go out for your runs, you really don't want to cut your run short by even a minute. The same needs to apply to your sleep routine. You need to be as religious and as strict about the amount of sleep and the quality of sleep that you're getting that you're not cutting out at all. This leads me on to the next point of sleep quality. Now, when I talk about sleep quality, we refer to this as sleep hygiene. Now, how do we make sure that we're getting a good quality night's sleep and talking about that sleep hygiene? Firstly, you want to make sure that you're in a nice cool environment. Typically about 18.5 degrees Celsius or about 65 degrees Fahrenheit is usually an optimal temperature for you to get a good quality night's sleep in. You can't really be, well, you can be too cold, but you can generally adapt a little bit better to cooler environments than what you can to hot or warm environments. So try and keep a nice cool environment for you to rest in for allowing a good quality night's sleep. Secondly, you also want to make sure that the room is dark. I'm talking about blackout curtains or blinds, something that's not allowing any light in. And I'm also not just talking about the street light outside or the neighbor's house's security light next door. I'm also referring to just that tiny little blue or red light that might be on a TV in a room or on an air conditioning panel in your room. Just that little standby light can affect the quality of our sleep. So if that is the case and you do have a TV in your room, maybe just throw a shirt or something over it at night so that we can get the darkest environment possible, again, to allow for a better quality night's sleep. Another really important factor to that sleep hygiene is trying to avoid screen time. I'm talking about iPads, laptops, cell phones. That blue light can affect our melatonin release and can also affect how well we sleep throughout the night. So as far as possible, try and limit screen time to about an hour before going to bed. You'd be better off reading a book. Very often we kind of find that we want to stay up to date with the news. Do that a little bit earlier. Read a book, even if it is a page or two, you might tend to fall asleep a little bit easier as well. So again, limit that screen time. Try and get off all screens about an hour before going to bed. And then you're ensured of a much better quality night's sleep. Your body needs the right kind of fuel to help you perform at your best during and after training. First is our fueling or our nutrition intake during exercise. It's really important that we have enough fuel to meet the required demands of what the task is at hand. So fueling during that session allows us to keep topping up our stores of muscle glycogen, as a result, allowing us to perform optimally throughout an entire training session. The second being our post-exercise nutrition or recovery nutrition. Now that can be broken into two aspects. Very often we hear about post or recovery nutrition being really focused around protein, and to a large degree that is right. But the two aspects has to be a refuel and a regeneration. So carbohydrate intake immediately after that training session is absolutely critical, because that is what's going to refuel or top up those glycogen stores. So the next training session you do, you've got enough energy in the system to be able to hit that session. And then the protein intake is where the regeneration happens. It's how we regenerate our muscles and our muscle fibers, so that again, we're building ourselves a little bit stronger every single time to take on the next load or the next demand that's thrown at us. So remember, two different components to that recovery meal: carbohydrate intake for refueling and protein intake for muscle regeneration. This is really critical, especially as runners over the age of 50, where muscle mass loss is quite high and can happen quite rapidly, that protein intake becomes really critical to make sure that we can also slow down that rate of muscle loss. Just keep in mind that when we are talking about that post-exercise nutrition, you want to try and get the nutrition in within a 20 to 40 minute window immediately after that training session. This is so that we can really optimize how well our body refuels those muscle glycogen stores. It is more important after a running session than it is after a strength training session, but I would recommend doing it after both sessions so that you're not in a catabolic state.
Now, something most runners over 50 do not realize is that your easy runs are just as important as your hard runs. And that means that the pace is what is important. If you don't get the pace right on your easy runs in particular, it's very difficult to run the correct pace on your hard runs. The important thing to understand about training on your easy runs is that you get very similar adaptation in the lower half of your aerobic zone as you do in the top half of your aerobic zone. But in the bottom half of your aerobic zone, you are not doing nearly as much damage. It means your recovery times after those sessions are much shorter, and it means that you get to show up for your next workouts feeling much fresher, which means that you can then hit those target paces and run fast enough when you're doing your hard sessions. So let's unpack a little bit what happens when we are doing our easy runs. Our easy runs are really important in terms of the physiological adaptations that we improve that are there for improving the transport of oxygen from your lungs down to your muscles, into your muscles, for transporting energy substrates down to the muscles where they are needed, and similarly then to remove all the byproducts of energy metabolism and to release, for example, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all of these things happen equally well across the entire range of zone 2. And you don't have to be up at the top of zone 2. You're not getting better physiological adaptation when you're running harder. What you're doing is more physical damage, increasing recovery time and reducing the effectiveness of your high intensity sessions. Now, the reason why we need to incorporate walk breaks into our training as we get older is that we simply do damage when we are running, because running elicits what we call an eccentric load. In other words, when you hit the ground and your muscles are acting as shock absorbers, your muscle fibers actually lengthen. And when they lengthen, you've got fewer muscle fibers in contact with each other, and so greater damage is done. As we get older, you can incorporate walk breaks into your training to reduce the amount of eccentric damage that is done. This will also force you to run slightly slower and get your pacing right on your easy runs. So how do we do that in practical terms? Well, essentially, both the older we get and the further we run, the more we need to increase the number of walk breaks that we are taking. And by adjusting your walk breaks for both age and training, you can establish a walk-run routine that works for you both in training and racing, so it will allow you to maintain a better average pace over the long term because it allows you to keep your legs fresher for longer. Now, we all know the story of the tortoise and the hare. Imagine older runners as the tortoise and younger runners as the hare. In the story, the hare is known for his speed and agility, while the tortoise is known for being slow and steady. Younger runners have quicker muscle recovery and are less prone to injury, just like the hare, who's able to dash forward and move with minimal rest. Older runners need more time between workouts to recover, just like tortoises need more time for rest and recuperation. In the race of training sessions, the hare might be able to train more frequently, hopping from one training session to the next. However, the tortoise or the older runner needs to take it slow, allowing ample time to recover so that they avoid injury and allow their muscles plenty of time to recuperate fully. So, Just as the tortoise in the story progresses much more slower and steadily than the hare, older runners may need longer and take more time to get up to speed. But well, we know how the story ends. The reality is that as we get older, we do lose muscle mass, and that then causes us to need to work a little bit harder to exercise the way that we always have, which in turn has a knock-on effect into recovery, means that we need longer periods of recovery between exercise bouts. So we can tackle this on two fronts. The first being that if you introduce strength training into your routine, you can both slow down the loss of that muscle mass, but even more importantly, we can reverse the impact of that muscle mass. And if we reverse the impact of the loss of that muscle mass, then you are going to improve your work capacity again, which means that we don't have to work as hard or harder than we used to do the same amount of work. So you can use heart rate to monitor your recovery and make decisions about what sessions you should be doing. And we can use this both with resting heart rate as well as what we call HRV or heart rate variability. So when we look at resting heart rate, that'll stay fairly stable over time. And as we are put under stress, be that from training or be that from some external factor like getting sick or maybe pressure at work, your heart rate will slowly drift up in response to that stress. We don't worry so much when it's around about 4 or 5 beats up. If it goes up more than that, we want to adjust the training that we are doing. And then heart rate variability, which most of the modern units are now able to track while you are sleeping, but it's the opposite. A high heart rate variability means that you're adjusting well to the training stresses, and a low heart rate variability means that you want to make some adjustments. And then Brad, you can break it down even further by starting to look at what are the norms for the different ages. For 25, 78 is the average HRV, 35, it is 60, the age of 45, it's 48, and by the time you reach 55, it's 44. So Brad, as you can see, as we get older, our HRV is going to get lower anyway. And that tells us that our nervous system is not as adaptive as we get older, and it's just another reason why we have to change the way that we train as we get older, because we have to allow more recovery time, because our body is just not as responsive and adaptive as it has been as we've been aging.
Knowing when to walk away from a session is absolutely important. I'm not saying everyone should quit just because you're feeling lazy on the day. I'm saying it's important to know when a session is doing more harm than good. If you're feeling exhausted or feel that you haven't recovered properly before starting an interval session, for example, you'd be better off by doing a light recovery session or even some cross training rather than slogging it out and risking getting injured. The idea of the cool down is when we're in a training session, your physiology, let's say, is up here. So we're talking your heart rate's elevated, you've got a higher blood pressure. Now suddenly you just stop a training session and you're not cooling down properly, that physiology just drops. And very often you might find a little bit of dizziness after a session. You might feel a little bit flat after that session as well. You need to see your cool down as a way of your body slowly returning to some sort of homeostasis or state of rest, if you want to put it that sense. Training sessions as well, there's that breakdown. There's a byproduct of the work that we're doing in every training session. And by cooling down, or at least slowing ourselves down with that cool down before we just stop, allows us to continue flushing the body of those byproducts, which then leads to a much quicker recovery time between training sessions. So almost see your cool down as not a pain to have to do, but see that cool down as speeding up or starting your recovery for tomorrow's session or the next training session.
The best pro athletes don't race every weekend. Pro athletes understand that they need to peak for their events, whether it's a national championship, an Olympic event, a big track meet, or whether it's for a marathon major, for example. Racing is an exhaustive process that requires tapering and extensive post-race recovery. So the best athletes understand that racing frequently can disrupt the training process.
So you finished your race, this marathon or ultra marathon, and so what do you need to do after that? Most people, when they finish their race, it's their big one for the year, they fall to the ground and then drag themselves up and go and have a couple of beers afterwards. And And that's okay, but just be aware that what you do in the first 24 hours after your race can have a really, really big effect on how you feel in the coming weeks, and will therefore mean that you get back into training earlier, that you're more recovered to carry on with normal life. So what are some of the things that we need to be doing in the first 24 hours when we finish a race? The first thing we need to look at is your nutrition. So we want to really ensure that we're replenishing all the carbs that we've used, all that muscle glycogen that you've used and probably depleted in your race. So we want to make sure that we putting back into the body what we used, right? So the first thing that we need to do there is ensure that we're getting some form of carbohydrate and protein mix. The ratio of this is a 4-to-1, so 4 carb to 1 protein. We've spoken about this often before, where we said that something like a chocolate milk is a really, really great thing to get in, because for the most part you're probably not going to want to get in a big meal after this big race of yours. So really ensure that your nutrition is key to help with that recovery within the first 24 hours. That will have a knock-on effect in the week to come. Linked to nutrition is alcohol, right? And I know after a big race it's celebration and we want to go have a couple of beers with our running mates and friends. And yes, that's awesome to do. And just be aware that there's a trade-off there, right? If you're going to go out and have a lot of beers, you're not going to feel great, and it is going to have an effect on your recovery. Alcohol doesn't help with muscle resynthesis. It actually sort of stops that or inhibits it. And so you are going to feel worse, not just the hangover, but it's going to have an effect on how your muscles recover after a race. But that's obviously a choice that you make. And just be aware that your recovery might just take a little bit longer thereafter. Some science has shown that one beer has actually doesn't have a detrimental effect on your recovery. 2+ beers tends to start acting as a diuretic, and you get dehydrated. So just be aware of that, and make sure that we're also taking in lots and lots of water as well. The next thing is sitting or lying down, right? So I know that when you finish this race, you probably just want to stop. You just want to stop and lie down or sit down. Of course, we don't really want you to do that. We want you to just try and keep moving a little bit. If you find that you sit down or lie down, you probably are going to struggle to get up. So find someone who's able to help you up. And also, if you're sitting down or getting into a car for an extended period of time, you probably are really, really going to struggle to move thereafter. So just try and keep moving, keep walking, even if it's at an absolute snail's pace, but just keep moving gently as you finish your race. Very often the races will enforce that because they don't want to have this congestion around the finish line anyways, but just try and keep moving, and try not to sit in one position for too long. Next on the list is looking at other recovery modalities like ice baths or massage, or a massage gun or foam rolling. And so let's dive into those. So ice baths have come under a lot of contention lately. There is a lot of science that says using cryotherapy, so in some sort of way, whether that's your whole body or parts of your body, has a good effect on recovery, but it inhibits adaptation. So we don't necessarily want to be using ice baths during training, because what it does is it might help with recovery, but it doesn't help with getting better and fitter and faster. And so using an ice bath after your race is a great idea, because it's really going to help with recovery, and we don't need any adaptation until we start training again. You're going to take a couple of weeks off of running anyways, so that probably is a great idea to get into an ice bath or some form of cryotherapy, because it is really good for recovery, but inhibits a little bit of adaptation. Using something like massage or a massage gun, yes, is also shown to be effective. And if you have access to either of those modalities after your race, that is a great idea to do. Maybe the next day or 2 days afterwards would be the ideal time to fit that in. 24 hours post-race, an old kind of way of thinking was that the next day you get out there and you do a little shuffle run to what was known as, sort of washing out all the lactic acid from your system. I actually can't even form those words because my science brain has a little twitch, because that myth has really been debunked. The reason you feel sore, the reason that you are really struggling, is because there's been muscle fiber damage. Your muscle fibers have torn. It's not around this lactic acid buildup and then going for a run is going to wash all of that out. In actual fact, if you decide to go out for a little shuffle run the next day, you're probably going to be doing a little bit more harm to those muscle fibers as opposed to good. So that old school kind of thinking of let's go out and wash out all of the bad substances is very old school way of thinking. You'll benefit way more from some rest and recovery and allowing that muscle resynthesis to happen in the right sort of way, using sleep and nutrition to help that, as opposed to putting the muscles under more strain the following day. So we've gone through what you do 24 hours post-race. We've gone through what you do the week after your race. Now we're going to be talking about 2 weeks after your race. Dev and Lindsay have made it very clear that no running for 2 weeks after your race. That is really, really important. But we get a lot of pushback about this, and people are chomping at the bits to get out there again. So, cross training. Aim for something that is non-weight bearing, something like cycling, swimming, elliptigo, rowing. All of those things are awesome because they don't have the load that running has, but you can still get your exercise kind of fix. Now, I'm not saying to go out there and break yourself doing some sort of cross training. The intensity that you do this at is really, really important. You've just run a big race, so ease back into this. Go for a light cycle, just spinning the legs, turning them over, or something else that's just really, really light. You don't want to be doing anything that's too hard. Nice and easy, just to ease yourself back into it. Some light strength may also be a good idea, just making sure that you, again, just focusing on the intensity of what you're doing.
I mean, Jess, I love a beer after a run, but you'll know what it feels like having too many beers and that. And the study, from a physiological point of view, the time to exhaustion has shown it's way reduced. So you'll feel tired on your next training run a lot quicker. A really big one here is the glycogen and amino acid absorption in the body. So what I mean by that, we know glycogen is a fuel source. It's a substrate that your body requires in order to produce energy. And I mean, if your body's not absorbing and utilizing that properly, there already your performance is just going to take a knock every single time. And that amino acid really being a protein, so that affects the recovery process. So that muscle rebuilding after your training run. So now, I mean, that's twofold. You've got poor performance from alcohol and your recovery. So you can imagine what that's going to do, the knock-on effect to tomorrow's training session as well. I saw a study the other day that actually says just in terms of strength abilities as well. So they did a study on the isometric strength that you can put out is also way reduced just as a result of alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a glass or two of wine the night before a long run, and I've seen a marked difference in heart rates. So pre-run, no alcohol, normal sort of heart rate, run after a night, so not heavy drink, 1 or 2 glasses, and 8 to 12 beats difference in heart rate.
I'm glad you said that, because that's almost exactly like what the science will show, is that 8 to 12 beat difference in heart rate. Remember, your body is having to work so much harder, your heart's having to work so much harder. You're putting toxin, poison, alcohol technically is a poison. And you're putting that into your body. Now, your body's always, like being sick, it's always going to try and fight harder to get rid of those toxins. It's sending more blood to the blood vessels, trying to just keep your body in some sort of state of homeostasis. So yes, that's exactly why you'll see your heart rate higher. Again, let's take it to the next day's training session. Your heart rate's higher, you start to panic. What am I doing wrong? Heart rate's higher, so that affects the quality of that training session.
Yeah, I mean, that increased heart rates the next day, I mean, must also have to do with sleep, right?
Massively. So if you had to think about you going out, not even just a couple of beers here, I mean, if you had to have a good night out and you're drinking a lot, several beers, wine, alcohol, whatever it might be, more often than not, you're going to fall asleep quickly. So that's a big thing. It's your onset of sleep is very quick, and you think you passed out and you're having a really good night. I can assure you the quality of sleep, and you're going to be restless. So throughout the night, as that alcohol is starting to work its way out of your system, you're just so restless throughout the night. So that is affecting the quantity and the quality of sleep. And that's just going to have these massive detriment to how you're recovering as well. So it's all this vicious cycle that's constantly going on.
Yeah, constantly coming back to the quality of your performance the next day and that recovery. I think those are the 2 main points that are getting knocked.
For sure.
All right, so yeah, I mean, we're recreational runners, and we're not saying don't drink at all. How do we get the balance right here?
We're human. We're recreational, like you say, we're going to want to have a drink. You can control it though, as to getting your timing of things right. If you are training for a big event, you might have a really big goal event coming up that you you're working really hard to and you're trying to get the quality of your training right, I think just try and plan around things like that. So if you're in a heavy training block and you know you've got lots of miles to do for a couple of weeks on end, just cut back. I'm not saying don't socialize, but maybe have 1 or 2 beers in the evening or after a run or something with someone rather than 6 or 7. Yeah. So it really comes down to just controlling that, periodizing your drinking if you'd like to go that route. But when you have a recovery week or some time off, keeping in mind obviously it affects recovery, but if you've got less training load, feel free to socialize a little bit more around having a few drinks. But I think just try and prioritize. You've got a goal, and if you're working towards that goal, why sacrifice it with poor night's sleep and poor recovery from drinking?
Dev, that's excellent advice. And balancing these things are important. So by balancing, does that mean having a beer in each hand?
I noticed you put both hands up. No, that's not what I mean by that.
Okay, but
life balance.
Yeah. But okay, and then as we get to race day, I mean, obviously we want to celebrate PBs and wins. I mean, I read a study about, post-race or post-race drinking, and they did a study, a control group of people who were drinking and another group of people having water and the alcohol. And obviously the people who had water and alcohol didn't have as detrimental effects on recovery. What are your views on that post-race?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good one. I mean, I've seen another study also. If you think about, we drive home the points, nutrition, recovery nutrition, whether it's your chocolate milk or more protein, more carbohydrates, whatever it might be post-race for recovery purposes. The study I read actually shows you can put all of that in place and be perfect on your timing and your quantities. If you are going to then go and have 6 or 7 beers afterwards, there's no point in having done any of that. It negates everything that you've done well. So all your good recovery strategies you're throwing out the window by having too many beers afterwards. In saying that, again, coming back to, you talk about PBs, I mean, we are recreational runners. We do want to celebrate good results. If it's your goal event and you're training for a massive event and you know you're going to have some time off afterwards, you don't have another event coming up, you're going to go into a bit of an off season. I'm not the fun police by any means. I'm going to have a couple of beers and have a good celebration. So again, I think that comes around to planning around different events. If you know that you need to get back on the recovery because a week later you might have something else coming up, then try and rein it in a little bit. But yeah, I think just keep in mind your recovery has to take priority, especially thinking about what might be coming next. But also, I'm not going to stop anyone from having a good time and celebrating those little wins.
Yep, definitely. Yep. Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Nutrition is also an important component of recovery, both in terms of providing the energy that we need as well as the recovery, and we're going to dive into that in a lot more detail later in the video. It's important to realize that we also can't do the same amount of work in the same way that we used to do it in our 20s and 30s. The best example of this is to use a factory that needs to be staffed by 1,000 people. If 400 of those people suddenly fall down with an illness and we've got 600 people that need to do the work of 1,000 people, there's no ways that they can sustain the effort required to do all the work without giving those 600 people extra rest. And so to ensure that you get the most out of your training as you get older, you have to make sure that you are allowing adequate recovery. Now, this new way to train as a 50-year-old isn't exactly new, and some of you may be doing it, but are probably doing it incorrectly, and most runners I know aren't doing it. And that is strength training. We know that people start to lose muscle mass in their 30s and 40s, and it really accelerates into their 50s. And that means that as we are getting older, we're trying to do the same amount of work with less. And that means that we've got to work harder, and when we work harder, that means that we are compromising our ability to both perform and to recover. And that is why strength training is so critical to helping you improve your performance. And here's the good news. Research has shown that strength training not only stops or slows down the rates of loss of muscle as we get older, but it can actually reverse it. So if you do the right strength training, you can actually improve your muscle mass and get yourself to be back as strong as you were when you were in your 20s and 30s, and that will allow you to have a much greater work capacity. We know that running is also a sport with a high eccentric component. So that means that we're also doing damage to our bodies all the time when we are running and training. And the stronger your body is, the more that it'll be able to withstand the eccentric force that you're putting on running. So running not only improves our performance directly, it also has an improvement in performance by reducing our injury risk, which allows us to remain more consistent. And if we remain more consistent, we can train better for longer and also perform better. And that reminds me, I've actually created a free strength training plan, which I'll put in a link below.
Trends like cold plunges and ice baths have gained a lot of traction online for their supposed benefits in recovery. However, their effect on training adaptation can be misleading. Cold plunges are the latest trend on social media that all influencers are punting at the moment, claiming all sorts of performance benefits. Wrong. When we train, our body breaks down. There are slight damage and micro tears in our muscle fibers. As a result of this, we have this inflammatory response, leading the body to help repair itself and make ourselves stronger. Cold water immersion inhibits that inflammation and in turn inhibits our adaptation. Science has proven that ice baths are good for recovery, but not when you're looking for adaptation. For example, in a multi-day stage race, it would be good to do some ice baths or cold water immersion for recovery between days and between stages. But it's not good to do an ice bath after every single training session when you're in a peak training block looking for adaptation to get fitter and stronger. Stop focusing on the flashy stuff. Get the basics right first. Sleep, nutrition, and importantly, consistency. That should make up 98% of your recovery strategies. The other 2% are just cherries on the top, things like massages, cold water immersion, ice baths, compression garments, etc.
Another reason that you might be slowing down as a runner over 50 is that you're not recovering enough. You're constantly finding yourself tired and fatigued, and the reason for that is because as an aging runner, you think that you need to work harder and harder and harder to get to the points where you used to be. If you find that you need to work harder and harder and harder, all you're doing is just digging yourself into a deeper hole, and that is going to make your running worse. When we start to understand that during rest and recovery is actually when you're getting the benefits of the exercise, you will start to see rest and recovery as important, if not more important, than your running and strength sessions. Earlier, I spoke about the physiological changes and the declines that are happening that will affect your running. And as a result, we actually need to add more rest and recovery into our running. At least one full rest day a week so that you're getting the benefits of all this work that you're doing. And by full rest day, I mean no running, no cross training, and no strength on that day.
Resting heart rate is a really useful metric, and we can use it to track things like stress, our reaction to training, if we're getting sick, etc. And to do that effectively, we've got to track it over time. So if you can do it every morning, that will make it the most useful, but certainly every 2 to 3 days, you want to be taking your resting heart rate. How you will then use that is to keep a record of it. Now, if your resting heart rate is going down slowly over time, that is great. It's not going to get considerably less, but that's fine. Even if it does, that just shows us that you are responding well and training is going well, and it is a potential indicator of improving fitness. What we're looking for, though, is changes in the other direction. So if your heart rate or resting heart rate in particular is going up over time, that's when the alarm bells start ringing. Changes of between 2 and 3 beats per minute, we don't worry too much about that. When we want to start taking note is when we see changes in the region of 4 to 5 beats per minute. That is telling you that something in your life is tipping the balance over. So you're either not quite recovering properly, perhaps something stressful is going on that is impacting on your resting heart rate, because your body can't differentiate between stress from work, stress from family, or stress from training. So we know that something isn't quite right. We know that you aren't quite recovering to continue training hard. And so we then want to figure out, okay, what is going on? And then we'll decide what we can potentially do about that.
Knowing when to walk away from a session is absolutely important. I'm not saying everyone should quit just because you're feeling lazy on the day. I'm saying it's important to know when a session is doing more harm than good. If you're feeling exhausted or feel that you haven't recovered properly before starting an interval session, for example, you'd be better off by doing a light recovery session or even some cross training rather than slogging it out and risking getting injured.
Linz, you mentioned 6 evidence-based recovery methods that you perhaps use. Maybe tell us a little bit more about those.
So essentially what I do as I get home from every run is that I never run all the way to my house. So I will stop my watch and I will walk to the house so that I am effectively cooling down. When I walk through the front door, I then go to the kitchen and I mix myself a drink or get some water and grab some fruit or something to eat. And then I head out to the veranda where I will then do a stretch every day. And then once I feel like I'm cool enough, that's when I will then move off and go and shower and get ready for my day. And then at some point during the day when I'm having some downtime or if I'm reading a book, I will then typically get into my compression boots and do between 20 and 40 minutes most days of the week, depending on how much time I've got available to me.
Awesome. So let's unpack that a little bit. So let's go into why recovery. So first, straight after our sessions, why are we looking at recovery? Can you just give us a little bit of the science?
Not so much science, but just in layman's terms, what we are trying to do as soon as we are finished with the session that we are busy with, especially when it's been a hard or a particularly long session, is we want to start the process of restoration. So we physically are looking at repairing the body, giving it the space to get over the work that we've done, but very importantly then to build on top of that. So our bodies repair the damage, but we don't want to stop there because the body's like, hang on, how can I make myself better prepared to cope with the next training load that this guy's going to give me? And so we want to then improve the system, and that ultimately is the active recovery. It's not simply, as a dictionary states, as a return to health or return to a specific state. That's step 1 of the recovery. Step 2 of the recovery is to improve, enhance, get better, so that over time we get fitter, stronger, faster.
So now you understand why recovery is so critical for runners over the age of 50. But here's the thing, it's not just about training smarter, it's about fueling your body the correct way. There are 9 essential supplements that make a huge difference for runners over the age of 50 that help with their bone health, endurance, and overall performance. Click on the video on screen right now to find out what they are and how you can keep running better for many years to come.